Good day. Today is Sunday, the 11th of May, 2025. My name is Alva Hicks, and I'm going to discuss a mission statement and the first episode of what is going to be an ongoing series dealing with human origins in the Americas. So anyway, I'd like to begin with a title for this. It's Assessing the Primacy of Hemispheres in Human Origins Research. A century of skepticism and the retrieval of the 19th century concept of Autochthonous American, from which he spread to the Old World. To quote William Henry Holmes, 1912. The mission statement is, the repatriation of ideas presents a novel approach to a fundamental belief held by traditional Native American knowledge holders, that they have inhabited their ancestral lands from time immemorial. The great mystery foretells not a peopling of the Americas, but rather a recent peopling of the Eastern Hemisphere. The Western Hemisphere once offered in the late 1800s and to the early 1900s a focal role in human evolutionary theory. But why did scientists set aside the idea? That is the question. This hesitation is reconsidered as Autochthonous American, once he spread to the Old World, meets today's premise. A global EURIKA moment awaits. This 40-year interdisciplinary anthropological investigation expands beyond the scope of scientific conjecture. We will soundly translate archaeological, genetic, paleontological, and zoological correlations that complement this fundamental evolutionary theory. These episodes begin with a historical narrative and its consequences, and expands to explore the ramifications of well-established scientific observation, resolving elementary episodes and highlighting gray areas along the way. I would like to again quote Chief Luther Standing Bearer Glala Sioux. I have two quotes to begin this episode. His quote states, "Knowledge is inherent in all things. The world is a library." End of quote. Another quote that we find valuable and will find valuable are that all truths are easy to understand once they are discovered. The point is to discover them. End quote. That's from Galileo Galilei. The abstract of this presentation starts with, the Western Hemisphere offers a point of departure in rediscovering human origins that have yet to receive adequate academic consideration, whether actively pursued or fundamentally dismissed. A historical narrative foreshadows the continuing enigma and its rightful place in the contemporary human origins academic debate. An American Wellspring model explores today's relevance and the scientific significance of prematurely removing a Native American Aboriginal source for the peopling of the Eastern Hemisphere, heralded 110 to 150 years ago by Florentino Ameghino and Alfred Russel Wallace and others. I refer to this finding of this in Smith-Spencer 1984 A World Survey of the Fossil Evidence. And the renewal of one very significant American idea, that they inhabited the Americas from time immemorial, is scientifically tested in the following documentaries. These presentations aim to expand upon paleontological and paleoanthropological discussions, constrained by discoveries and terms determined from evidence formulated by looking alone to the Eastern Hemisphere, when the Western Hemisphere offers overwhelming predicted clarifications. Historical and recent interpretations are called forward as the untested, unknown, forgotten alternative that we, quote, he was Autochthonous in the Americas once he spread to the Old World, meets today's logic. A peopling there of the Americas formed via default, as an Autochthonous origin for the American race may be set aside, and the problem of the arrival in the New World of racial elements originating in the Old World need alone receive consideration, in quote, holding, quote, that the testimony, if it is to stand, must have much additional support. Again, from Holmes, 1912. The much additional support is highlighted throughout these programs. Introduction, a historical narrative. The abstract highlighted the starting point for this discussion, the least of which is the preconceived conceptual decision to omit the Americas from the historical search for human evolutionary origins. The long dismissed concept is revived as a guideline for building upon its original premise, which were dismissed over a century ago. These multifaceted, multidisciplinary constructs challenge scholars to bring reason to the forefront in shifting the burden of truth of a well-defined paradox. Quote from Willamette and Clark, the paper begins with a paradigm crisis in modern human origins research. End quote. A detailed argument delves beyond just the circumstantial evidence to a bona fide articulation approaching irrefutable evidence based on inductive reasoning. I'm going to quote here on the works of Florentino Amigino, as seen by Padorni and Politis in 1993. Quote, in essence, Amigino argued that people evolved on the Argentine pampas and subsequently spread to other parts of the globe. In the other extreme of the Americas, the discussion originated in the 1860s. In fact, Alice Hirschlicka, 1907, concluded with regard to the American early man that in North America it appeared to establish the fact that no specimen had come to light which, from the standpoint of physical anthropology, represented other than a relatively modern man. End of quote. When we say modern man, or anatomically modern humans, we are saying something that is recent by saying modern. And the argument that Amigino and Alfred Russel Wallace, Julian Coleman, Sir Arthur Keith, and other people were making at the turn of the century, the previous century that is, that the stability of the human form over time was stasis, that we are and have been Homo Sapiens Sapiens for much longer than the terms that have defined our modern arrival in the Old World. So to place it in context, Hirschlicka was leading the parade of the Neanderthal phase of human evolution, leading to Homo Sapiens Sapiens. And just by saying that because there is no such thing as nothing but a modern presence of all of the finds of skulls or antiquity suggesting humans were in the Americas at an earlier time, could not be the case, because morphologically he required that there be a earlier Homo erectus or Neanderthal stage. And when you require that and you don't find it, perhaps another theory needs to be used to justify our sudden recent arrival in the old world. So he ruined the careers of numerous people who had believed and who had brought to him, or other scientific forms, the idea of great antiquity for early man in the Americas. So it was not easy to bring this idea up following Amagino's and Wallace's deaths in 1910, 1911. So we again are going back to that historical start, going back to the start to see where our assumptions may have led us astray. The populations that subsequently spread to other parts of the globe displaced the then well-established earlier occupants, Homo erectus, and thus a recent modern articulation can be inferred. Anatomically modern humans, people who evolved from a wellspring in the Americas, predate this spread and may not need to appear as an irritating enigma other than a relatively modern man that he and our ancestors were hiding in the Americas. By adopting a new starting point, we address the illumination and illuminate the issue, and in so doing we predict a solution to the nomenclature, thereby eliminating an irritating enigma. We need to adopt a multi-hemispherical perspective and all-inclusive theory with a quasi-logical explanation to reset this predetermined scholarly judgment inherited following anthropology's dawn as a science. It is informed by Bayesian inference, the cause and effect of natural law, while adhering to a basal interpretation of Autochthonous American. It is beholding a paradigm shift, shifting the burden of truth that accommodates a scientific resolution to truism from the starting point to the end point. It is all-encompassing, and it requires only that we test it. This is what this appeal is in the general forum of this YouTube series. We just need to look at another solution, because I will point out that not all or many or any of the current issues surrounding multi-regional evolution, Eve out of Africa, or an ancestral spread out of Asia, which would be the first place that human beings would find themselves if they were across into the old world from the Americas during a form of glaciation, deglaciation. So why were human beings isolated for so long in the Americas? This was a point that I had in a discussion with Louis Binford, well-recognized archaeologist for the form of new archaeology, which was to bring scientific interpretations from archaeologists of their finds into the anthropological world. And he once asked me, when I returned a phone call we had been sharing for years, he said he pretty much had a gotcha moment. She said if human beings had evolved in the Americas, he wouldn't have probably ever left. And I immediately thought for just a second and responded, Lou, I think you've answered one of the most important questions I've always had since I began to study. Why didn't we, human beings, Paleo-Americans, leave the Americas, if they were originating from the Americas, until just 50,000 years ago? Why didn't it happen much earlier? Well, we're going to discuss this, and I think there is a paleontological insight that is easy to share regarding this moment, this discussion. I'm a horse person. I love animals, but probably love horses more than anything. They originated in the Americas, and they hadn't made it to the Old World until about 2.6 million years ago. Why? Because that is the onset of the glacial epochs. Since then, we've had about 2.6 million years ago, 3 million or 30 glacial events, wanings and waxings, if you will, of the ice sheets over Canada, existing Canada today, the Northern Hemisphere. When the horse first made it to the Old World, he had to have crossed the Bering Land Bridge. In order to cross it, the ice had to have been deposited on the landmass, which began to occur again, this event, these ice ages, about 2.6 million years ago. So the horse may very well have been hiding in the Yukon that far back. And we know that because after he began to cross that land bridge, there would have been no way back into the Americas where his ancestors, the ancestral horses, still remained. They would have been a small bottleneck of the group of horses that had always been in the Americas. So for the first time they migrated out. The famous Przewalski horse is a descendant of the probably original horses that spread into Europe in the form of the wild ass and donkey, and then spread into Africa and became the zebra. And so before that time, these horses were not anywhere to be found in the Old World. And in itself, this mirrors what may have happened 50,000 years ago when human beings, again, just like the horse, were trapped in the Yukon. And when the ice started to form on the landmass, the water began to dissipate. And the bridge, which is only about 50 feet below the surface of the Bering Sea right now, soon formed, and we, through a bottleneck evidenced by genetics, migrated out of the Americas just like the horse. It's not hard to conceive of all of this if we can see some of the genetic data that suggests that our genetic diversity is much reduced in our Old World descendants. It's kind of like taking a little bit of the top of a container, a vessel of water, pouring it out, and expanding from that population into the Old World. The genetic diversity found in American Indians, in individual tribes, is equivalent to small tribes, equivalent to 60% of sub-Saharan Africa, and 80% of Japan. In papers that were written by Rick Ward and Savante Pavo. And then there is the issue of the mutational drift equilibrium that is found in populations that remained behind in the Americas. These populations were expected to not have that kind of founding effect, if you will. There's that kind of resilience. They didn't have evidence of founding effects. All of the lineages looked like they were in balance. Where in the old world, the arrival and genetic makeup of individual populations can be distinguished in regional areas from Asia to Europe, Australia, and Africa. So we'll explain this further. It is very simple to understand, but these genetic papers about American Indians was lost in the need to define what they really are saying. And I've met with Chakrabarty, I've met with a number of people. I have letters from Rick Ward who say that my interpretation of the genetic antiquity of human beings in the Americas synchronizes with the data that he had accumulated. And so we'll go from there why it didn't get past some of the parameters that I've faced and German Zeibel has faced in trying to make sense of what should be very simple interpretation. Just like all discoveries, once you make them, they fall into place. But you have to guess the right one and not eliminate it. Thank you.